Hello, and welcome to SMD100 Foundations of Sports Medicine. Today we will be learning about diversity in sports medicine. Please make sure that you have already printed out the worksheet for your ticket in, as you will be answering some questions as you go along watching Part 1 and Part 2 of these lectures. So the objectives today will be to define diversity and the relative terms, identify the importance and constructs of culturally competent care, and examine one's own cultural competence. So let's define diversity. Go ahead and on your ticket in, answer question number 1 and define what you feel is a good definition of diversity. You can pause the video to take a second to do this. So one definition of diversity is the inclusion of individuals representing more than one national origin, color, race, religion, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, gender, sex, etc. So you can notice that there are many different factors that might be included under the umbrella term diversity. There are a few terms that I think is important or are important to identify and understand. Two of those terms are race and ethnicity. Oftentimes these terms are used interchangeably, but they are actually two different terms. Race is associated with biology and can be identified by genetically distinct populations. So the U.S. Census Bureau identifies the different races in the United States as white, Black or African American, Asian, American Indian or Alaska Native, Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, or 2+ races or mixed race. You can also put other. Whereas ethnicity is associated with culture and is often defined as how the individual identifies themselves. The U.S. Census Bureau identifies the two main ethnicities in the United States as only Hispanic or Latino or non-Hispanic or Latino. So to better understand these, here's an example. If somebody's Japanese American, their race may be Asian or Japanese, but they may not identify with the Japanese ethnicity or culture. They may consider themselves Japanese American. It is important to understand that although race and ethnicity are two different terms, they often overlap. For this reason, the 2015 consensus this year will actually combine race and ethnicity together. This was mainly done because the U.S. Census Bureau found that many Americans in the United States were not being counted in the U.S. Census Bureau under race because they weren't checking any race at all and only checking ethnicity. They found that many Hispanics or Latinos or Latinas were identifying just as Hispanic or Latino or Latina and not as white or black as per their race. And so they decided to combine race and ethnicity together so that one could check white, black, African American, Hispanic or Latino, non-Hispanic or Latino, and you may check all that applies. This is the first time that the U.S. Census Bureau is doing this. Again, it is important to understand that ethnicity is associated with culture and is actually how one identifies themselves. Some other terms here that are often mistakenly used interchangeably are sex and gender, and we'll also get to sexuality. Sex is actually the biological trait that society associates with being male or female. These are your biological genitalia that you are born with. Whereas gender is actually your personal identity. So with gender, cultural meanings are attached to being masculine and feminine, which influences personal identities. So for example, being man, woman, transgender, intersex, genderqueer, and many, many others that we really don't have time today to get into, but I encourage you to look further into and explore those different types of genders. So, for example, if you were taking a research study or a survey and they asked you your sex, the two options should be male or female, as those are the two biological sexes of the human species. However, if the survey were to ask you your gender, the options should be male, female, transgender, intersex, genderqueer, etc. And if those options are not there, then they're not being all-inclusive, because, again, gender is an actual identity. Sexuality, however, is a person's sexual attraction. It's important to understand, though, that practices and identities may not, or they may, align with sex and gender. So one may be heterosexual, homosexual, or gay or lesbian, bisexual, queer, and many others. However, sexuality often does not have anything to do with one's sex or gender. An example of this is something that's been occurring in the media more recently in the past few months regarding Caitlyn Jenner. Caitlyn Jenner, who is formerly Bruce Jenner, the Olympic gold medalist, was born as a male. That was her previous sex. Currently, she's going through a transsexual transformation to change her sex into a female. However, even as Bruce, when Caitlyn was Bruce, her sex was male, but her gender was female. So even though she had male biological traits, she identified as female. So again, her sex was male, but her gender was female. This can be confusing, but it's important to understand the difference between these two. In addition, during many interviews, Caitlyn Jenner was asked, well, now that you are officially identifying as a female, does that make you gay? She had a hard time answering that question because her answer very often was, those have nothing to do with each other. Her sex and her gender have nothing to do with her actual sexuality. That was a different part of her. That was her sexual attraction. So these different constructs are important to understand in our society in order to become culturally competent individuals. So what is all this cultural competence about? Why do we need to be culturally competent? This is because, as athletic trainers, we need to be able to provide culturally competent care. This is a process in which an athletic trainer learns to appreciate and respect cultural differences and take them into consideration in order to care for patients in a culturally congruent manner. The CATIE also requires that athletic training students have educational competencies related to diversity and cultural competence. The NATA provides the statement that you can read here. So this statement essentially outlines that we as athletic trainers need to A, understand our patients, B, achieve optimal health for diverse populations, and C, work respectively and effectively with these diverse populations. So therefore, we need to become culturally competent. However, it's important to understand that we can't just become culturally competent overnight. Becoming culturally competent is an ongoing process, and it happens over time. Each individual in society is going to be somewhere different than the next individual on the cultural competence continuum. So as you grow and learn and become more experienced working with diverse populations, you will or should become more culturally competent. But again, it's an ongoing process. So why is cultural competence important? To review this again, we can look back, especially in more recent years, the past 15 years, the U.S. Consensus has identified significant changes in our demographics in the U.S. Growth in the American workforce specifically involved an increase in women, while men actually declined. People of color, so African Americans, American Indians, Asian Americans, Pacific Islander Americans, and Latinos have increased, as well as immigrants in the United States. Approximately 20% of the population now speaks a language other than English. So therefore, athletic trainers should be prepared for these demographic changes and more demographic changes as we grow as a country. Culture and language have a significant impact on how patients access and how they respond to healthcare services. So therefore, if we are not changing with the demographic changes in our country, we might not be providing culturally competent care or the best care that we could provide to our patients. Cultural beliefs and practices. So athletic trainers need to be aware of many things. Number one, athletic trainers need to be aware of the patient's beliefs about causes, signs, and symptoms of illnesses or injuries, patients' beliefs and choices about how to seek care, which may not align with Western practices, various culture-bound syndromes that may present as general medical conditions or mental disorders as classified by Western medicine. So what this means is, in different cultures, certain medical conditions and often mental health conditions or disorders are actually tied to specific cultures where they don't identify this as a disorder or a syndrome or an illness, but maybe something else that has to do with their culture. Whereas in Western medicine, we see this as an issue or a mental health condition. So it's important to understand these differences. And lastly, complementary and alternative medicine practices are becoming very popular, especially in the United States. And so we need to appreciate and understand these different types of practices. There are 4 constructs of culturally competent care, and it's important that we understand these: cultural diversity, awareness, sensitivity, and competence. Cultural diversity, as we said before, is the difference between groups based on distinguishing factors such as race, ethnicity, national origin, sexual orientation, sex, gender, ideology, which could be defined as religion, language, disability or ability, and generation, or different age groups. However, cultural awareness is a person's ability to be cognizant, observant, and conscious of similarities and differences among and between different cultural groups. So this is essentially standing back from ourselves and contemplating, okay, maybe the X race or sex or this religion does have a reason to feel the way that they do, whether that's feeling marginalized, angry, happy, and certainly with the ongoing issues in the United States today regarding different races and religions, it's important that we understand different worldviews of different cultural groups and try to step back from our own beliefs and perceptions and understand their culture and how they feel. Cultural sensitivity is the recognition of your own personal attitudes, values, beliefs, and practices. It's the self-examination and in-depth exploration of one's own cultural background and how that relates to other cultures. So it's your ability to understand your own personal attitudes, beliefs, and culture and how that might relate or affect other cultures and other practices. And lastly, cultural competence. So again, this is a developmental process that evolves over an extended period in which both individuals and organizations are at various levels of awareness, knowledge, and skills on this continuum that we call cultural competence. So if we're providing culturally competent care, then we're providing effective services to people of all cultures, races, and ethnic backgrounds, and religions, in a manner that respects the worth of individuals and preserves their dignity. Okay, so here we can take a break. Thank you for watching part 1 of Diversity in Sports Medicine. And once you take a break, you can begin video number 2.